Showtime. I'm Brent Holland from Night Fright. Welcome to the show. Tonight, Dr. Bob Thiel joins us, and tonight we're going to be speaking about 2012 once more. His book, The Rise of the Secret Sect. Oh, what a ride it has been this past month of March. We started out the month, of course, talking about 2012. Right off the top, we started with one Alexandra Bruce and 2012 Science or Superstition. That was a really fun show. And by the way, folks, all the shows I'm about to mention are available www.nightfrightshow.com, free for you to download. We moved right along after that, and something I wasn't expecting, Crystal Skulls in 2012 with R. Joshua Shapiro. Very extremely profound and interesting. And then last week, of course, we looked at 2012 Armageddon and Patrick Garrell, and he believes the Earth will in fact end. His book, of course, How to Survive 2012. And tonight, as I said before, 2012 and the Rise of the Secret Sect, Dr. Bob Thiel. And oh, what a ride we have for you tonight. Strap in and hang on. Here we go.
There is a time to question. There is a time for answers. There is a time to challenge. There is a time to speculate. There is a time for change. There is a time for truth. The time is now. Welcome to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Welcome, one and all, to the final evening of our 2012 special. And what a great way we have for us to end it tonight. Dr. Bob Thiel is going to be joining us in just a few seconds. 2012 and the Rise of the Secret Sect. Stick around, folks, for this one, because this is electrifying. 8 world events aligning with prophecies in the book 2012 and the Rise of the Secret Sect have already come to pass since that book came out in September 2009. Find out which of the hundreds of prophecies it documents will affect you. Learn the fate of the U.S. dollar, gold, silver, and the world economy. Understand how to protect yourself and your loved ones. Discover which future world events signal the end of modern civilization. We're going to learn the striking similarities among the Mayan, Hopi, Catholic, I Ching. The I Ching, that's something we haven't touched on yet. We're going to do that tonight, folks. Wait till you hear this. Biblical, Islamic, Byzantine, Hindu, Chinese, and Tibetan prophecies. When I say there's a convergence going on like never before, folks, believe it. 2012 and the Rise of the Secret Sect contains hundreds of well-documented prophecies. The author, our guest tonight, Dr. Bob Thiel. Bob, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me, Brent.
You're very welcome. I was wondering, can you give us a little bit of a synopsis about your book?
Sure. The book is a little different than the other books out there in that if you read the book, it's mostly quotes and comments. In other words, the book actually quotes the actual prophecies so people can make up their own mind what they think about them. Basically, what the book does is it tries to explain what might happen, what will happen, what won't happen in 2012, and emphasizes a lot of things that are going to happen after 2012. So it's a little different than most 2012 books in that respect.
Okay, let's jump in right away to one of the prophecies. Let's talk about the Mayan and the Hopi prophecies. And then I want to go into the I Ching for sure, because that is something, as I said at the outset, we haven't touched on yet. But I was wondering, Bob, if we can start off with the Mayan and the Hopis.
Okay, well, with the Mayans were an ancient civilization in Central America. They're still Mayans, but they're no longer the great civilization that they were before. And they had a series of predictions. And there's basically 2 or 3 sets of predictions that they have. One is there's some ancient monuments that people have found that they believe essentially say that their calendar will end on December 21st, 2012, and that in prior cycles of their calendar ending, disasters have happened. So because of that, some people believe disasters are going to happen. The second set has to do with what are called codexes. Now, codex, that's a fancy word for a book. There were a lot of Mayan books, but they didn't really have writing the way we have it. They mostly were made up of pictures or drawings, paintings. Well, when the Spaniards discovered the Mayans, they felt that their practices were pagan and were demonically influenced, so they destroyed most of the codexes. But a Catholic priest actually stopped 3 or 4 of them from getting burnt. And in these codexes, there are drawings, and various people have different interpretations what those drawings mean. One of the ones that has caught a lot of people's attention, and it's actually shown in my book, shows water coming out of the mouth of a serpent onto a male figure and a female figure. And some people have interpreted that to mean that the Mayans are predicting that the world will end in a flood. Others have said, well, those figures are darkened figures, and maybe what this prophecy means is that the world will not be destroyed in the flood, but it will be purged of evil. So from those two basic interpretations of that particular picture in the Dresden Codex, you've got a lot of people who've made a variety of conclusions about a variety of Mayan prophecies. Then there's one more set.
Okay, fire away.
Okay. After the Spaniards came, they taught the Mayans how to write. And so what the Mayans did is they used our type of characters to write their language down. And they wrote a series of prophecies in a book called the Shilambalam. And this one's actually pretty specific in terms of some of what they teach. And if you don't mind, I'd like to actually read this.
Please do. Please do.
Okay, this is just read from page 19 of my book. So let me read what this says. It says, but when the law of the Khatun, that's the calendar, has run its course, the God will bring about a great deluge again, which will be the end of the world. So a lot of people say, see, the Mayans predicted the world would end in a flood. And they did. Okay? But you got to read the rest of the prophecy, though. It says, when this is over, then our Lord Jesus Christ will descend over the valley of Jehoshaphat, beside the town of Jerusalem, where he redeemed us with his holy blood. And the reason I wanted to read the entire prophecy is, if you start to think about this, you say, wait a second. The ancient Mayans would not have heard of Jesus Christ. Okay? So it's probable, when they put this prophecy together in writing, that they had been influenced by the Catholic missionaries. Because I have no idea why else they'd have a prophecy that talked about Jesus and Jerusalem and all that type of a thing. So the problem with that particular prophecy is if that prophecy is supposed to be true, it talks about Christ. Well, the primary book that talks about Jesus Christ is the Bible, and the Bible said the world's not going to end in the flood. So since the Mayan prophecy, in my view, clearly ties some type of Christianity in with a flood and the end of the world, it doesn't really flow. I think it contradicts Scripture, and again, it could not have been an ancient Mayan belief that the world was going to end in the flood and then Jesus was going to come.
That's a really unique perspective. That is truly, folks, by the way, our guest tonight, Dr. Bob Thiel, and the book is 2012 and the Rise of the Secret Sect. Excuse me, I'm just getting over a bit of a flu and got a little bit of thing in my throat. You can pick the book up, Chapters Indigo, right across the country, folks. By the way, Bob, Chapters Indigo is our version of Barnes Noble. And,
okay.
www.nightfrightshow.com. As always, folks, just click on the book cover. We'll take you to Chapters Indigo. Online, you can order it from the comfort of your own home. Now, this unique perspective, do you think this was manipulated then into the Mayan prophecy?
Well, I think that what was happening was, you got to look at the historical setting.
Right.
You have the Mayans who essentially got taken over by the Spaniards, and they probably didn't want to be too difficult, because if they showed too much of their ancient religion, they were more likely to be eliminated. So I believe that some of their religious leaders kind of blended, if you will, some Mayan prophecy in with what they thought were Christian prophecies, and that's why they came up with what they did. But you may recall that I mentioned before that there was something called the Dresden Codex.
That's right.
The
yes.
pictures that had the water.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was way before the Spaniards came. Okay, this was way before there were Spaniards over in Central America. So I do believe that their ancient culture did show some kind of a flood. But I personally do not believe the world will end in the flood on December 21st, 2012. It's not that I do not believe in the end of the world, because I do. And I do believe that various prophecies are going to come to pass, but I don't think that's how it's going to be. I don't think it'll be with water. Now, you also mentioned or asked me about the Hopi prophecies.
Yes, sir.
Now, the Hopi prophecies are kind of interesting because, in a sense, sort of like the Mayans, they weren't written down either. Except the Mayan ones, again, they started to write some down in the 1500s. So the Hopi ones, people started to basically collect them after the 1950s. And basically, the Hopi were looking toward a time sort of like this. And the Hopi seemed to be describing things that sounded a bit more like a nuclear war. The Hopi also, similar to some Mayan interpretations, said that it doesn't have to be a disaster, but we're probably going to have a time of chaos. Then there may be a time of war, and then there may be a time of peace. In my own personal view, is a little bit closer to the Hopi version. I do believe we're entering a time that's going to be chaotic, followed by a time of devastating war, and then ultimately followed by peace. Obviously, like most people, I prefer to have the peace now and have the rest later.
You mentioned just a few seconds ago, we're entering into chaotic period. I think we're already there, well into it. Now, what really is giving me the goosebumps here is the fact that the Hopis think that the world will end with a nuclear war, and you believe somewhat of the same thing. Wow. Can we talk about that a little bit and your perspective of how you feel the world will end December 21st, 2012?
Well, I don't believe the world will actually end December 21st, 2012.
Okay.
So let me step back on that for just a moment.
Okay, fair enough.
Remember I told you that there were two interpretations of the Mayan Dresden Codex, the
Yes,
picture
sir.
that has the serpent with water coming out of its mouth.
That's right, sir. Mm-hmm.
Well, what originally popularized 2012, by the way, was not any doomsday scenario. What originally popularized it was a man in the New Age movement by the name of Jose Arguelles, and he believed that when he looked at the Tibetan prophecies, the Mayan prophecies, and certain other prophecies throughout the world, he believed that a new age of peace was going to dawn on humanity, and he and some people like him were the ones who originally started to promote the idea that perhaps a golden age of peace, sometimes called the Age of Aquarius, would start to dawn somewhere around the end of the Mayan calendar. And then once he did that, others started to look in more depth. And others, again, I told you they're writing from the Shilam Balam, from the Mayans. I mean, it says the world's going to end in the flood. Okay, that's pretty direct. So others started to say, hey, the Mayan predictions aren't always good. The Hopi predictions aren't always good. While a lot of the Buddhist and Tibetan predictions sound pretty good in terms of peace and that type of a thing, others started to say, wait a second, this whole Mayan calendar 2012 stuff might have not to do with an age of peace, but to destruction. Now, what I think is going to happen in 2012, let me tell you the yes, the no's, and the maybes.
Okay.
First, the maybes. Because if you see on the front cover of my book, you see fire on the planet. There are scientific predictions from NASA scientists, from Russian scientists, that we may have solar flares or other types of solar problems somewhere between now and 2016.
From the sun.
Some think it'll be in 2012, some think it'll be 2011, some think 2014, 15. Now, I am not going to sit here and tell you I know for precisely what year that will happen. I do believe there will be a time where great heat will come to the Earth. I believe it'll be after 2012, but it does not mean we could not have some kind of solar flare that couldn't knock out our power supply. in 2012. So that one I'm going to call a maybe.
Well, it's actually happened before in Quebec, where I'm originally from Montreal, and it happened, I think it was back in the 90s, if I'm not mistaken. 97, 98, somewhere around there. And it did knock out the whole grid, folks, so it does happen.
And in the NASA report, which is in my book, it talks about essentially knocking out most of North America, not just an isolated province or city or county or metropolitan area. They actually say, they don't think it'll happen, but they think it is possible, and it could cause absolute disaster and chaos. But again, there isn't any specific way to know for sure. Now, getting back to the Mayan prophecies, the Mayans do talk about a time where the world will be on fire. And I believe there'll be a time of great heat, but again, I think this is going to be after 2012. And the Mayan prediction in terms of when the world will be hot, if you will, or on fire, I didn't see a date that looked like December 21st, 2012 when I was investigating it.
You're listening to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. The time is now. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Folks, our guest tonight, Dr. Bob Thiel. His book, of course, 2012 and the Rise of the Secret Sect, available, as I said before, chapters indigo right across the country, www.nightfrightshow.com. Click on the book cover, as always. Now, where do you think this will emanate from? If not the sun, that may be part of it, but if the world is to end, will there be a focal point? Will there be, I'm thinking Middle East. Right away. As soon as I hear nuclear, I think Middle East right away. Is that on track? Is that off track?
It's not. I guess it's more on than off. I would say in terms of focal point, what's going on in the Middle East is eventually going to play into all this. There are predictions, both from the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament, what Christians call the Old Testament, the New Testament, comments from Jesus, as well as from Catholic and Byzantine prophecies that seem to tell, and Islamic prophecies as well.
That's right, yes.
That tell of a time where a peace deal is going to be made, a peace deal that will be broken. And the peace deal seems to include some type of leader from Europe and apparently some leaders in the Middle East. And there are different people who look forward to this and different people who dread it.
I'm not sure.
Depending on their interpretation and what they think is going to happen.
If there's peace at the end of it all, perhaps I can look forward to it. But to get to the peace, woof, my God.
Well, you asked about a singular event.
Yeah.
The event, if I was looking for a specific, particular one event, and I do talk about this in the book, and that would be when this peace deal happens. There is a prediction, both in the biblical and Islamic prophecies, that there will be essentially a 7-year peace deal between some type of a European leader and some people in the Middle East.
Now, can I just interrupt you and ask a question? Is there a possibility that this European leader may be a Holocaust survivor, Netanyahu, perhaps, who is from Europe, and perhaps he makes a deal with one of the Arab countries, perhaps Egypt, as has already taken place. Actually, it was Menachem Begin. Somehow that's going to get twisted and that peace will be broken?
That's possible. And actually, it is for a couple of different reasons. I hadn't thought of it the way you worded it, but I'll tell you why I think from a couple of different perspectives it could.
Okay.
In the Hebrew prophecy,
yes, sir,
it talks about a leader called a prince. Now, typically, the top leader from those kind of perspectives would be something like an emperor or a king or something. So somebody called a prince is involved in the deal, which suggests to me that when the deal is made, this particular individual will not be 60, 70 years old, which is what would be if it was somebody's a Holocaust survivor. They would have to be in that age range. But somebody, like you said, could actually be a leader involved in it. And then he may be misled, if you will. So that certainly is a possibility, because the only thing from the Hebrew scripture perspective, it's some kind of a prince. Now, from the Muslim perspective, this is kind of interesting. The Muslims say a Roman Catholic leader from Europe is going to make a deal with their leader, who is called the Mahdi. or the final imam,
Right.
and that this Catholic leader is going to violate it in the middle. And then here's what's interesting. Then they say Antichrist will reign until Jesus returns. And it's funny because I talked about this once on a radio show in the States, and the host was a Muslim. And he said to me, well, all Muslims don't believe that Jesus is going to return. I said, excuse me? Sure they do. And now he's a Muslim, and he's telling me, no, they don't. I said, well, my book, I quote the Quran, and the Quran says Jesus is going to return. And I said, I suppose Muslims don't have to believe the Quran, but,
it sounds
they do
like
believe the Quran, they do believe Jesus is going to return.
It sounds like he was Sunni. It's mostly the Shias that believe in the 12th Imam, actually. But
yes, but both the Shiite and the Sunni do believe that, quote, the Son of Mary will return.
That's right. It's right in the Quran.
Okay, that part, I guess he was unaware that was actually in the Quran. And so I found that part fascinating, that when I first read it, that in Islamic prophecy, I knew they believed Jesus was going to come, but I didn't know they also believed that there was going to be some kind of a false peace deal that their leader was going to be involved in. And I quote, of course, that in the book.
Sure. And this is what makes me very wary of Ahmadinejad, folks. Pardon me again. I do apologize. I know we'll be doing that all night, I'm afraid. Ahmadinejad, of course, folks, is the president of Iran, and he wants to invoke an apocalypse, an Armageddon, in hopes of bringing back the 12th Imam for world. Well, he wants to control the world. He wants Islam to control the world, and this is frightening.
Well,
terrifying.
Even, if you heard a few years ago, he actually went out and said that the purpose of the Iranian Revolution was to bring in this Muslim leader, the Imam. Yeah. And that's why when he does certain things, and some of us scratch our head, why would he do such a thing? It's because, as you indicated, he seems to feel it is his job to start some kind of a major conflict, nuclear or otherwise. And then he believes that will bring in this Muslim leader.
Terrifying
It's absolutely
fanaticism.
terrifying. But that's what he seems to want to do.
Very ominous subject tonight, folks. We're at the bottom of the hour. I'm going to do this quick break, 5 minutes. As you all know, what I do is I read out some of the call letters of some of the shows that syndicate the show. Extremely ominous tonight. As well it should be. The important thing is to question everything and educate yourself. Do your own research, absorb it for yourself, and make your own decisions. And this is what we try to do. We try to put the information out there. Our guest tonight, Dr. Bob Thiel. Excellent book, 2012, and the Rise of the Secret Sect. You're going to want to get this one for your own cognizance. You can get it easily. Any chapters in to go right across the country. It's readily available on the shelves. I saw it just yesterday. I was in Chapters Indigo here in our local town, Sudbury. It was right there on the shelf. You can also pick it up online. Very easy way to get it. www.nightfrightshow.com. www.nightfrightshow.com. Click on the book cover when you're there. Take you right to Chapters Indigo online, where you can order it from the comfort of your own home.
You're listening to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. The time is now. And now your host, Brent Holland.
You're listening to Night Fright. I am your host, Brent Holland, and we broadcast every Wednesday night between the hours of 10 and midnight, live from Sudbury, Ontario, Laurentian University. Call letters here are CKLU 96.7 FM. I want to say a hearty hello to Deborah Frankel. She's our general manager here. She keeps us on the air. It's a volunteer radio show, folks. Nobody makes a dime off this show. And actually, I pay for the cost of the website and everything out of my own pocket. Deborah finds the money for the microphones, the electricity bill, etc., etc. We get no funding from anybody. So way to go, Deborah. I don't know how you do it, but you do it. Thank you so much for that. You're also listening to Caper Radio, Cape Breton University in Sydney, Nova Scotia. God's country, as my grandfather used to say. He was a maritimer. Wednesdays between 3:30 and 5:30 in the afternoon. And the general manager there is Matthew Burke, Jason Wellwood. He's over at Lakehead University in Thunder Bay, Ontario. Call letters CILU 102.7 FM. They broadcast every Sunday night at midnight. And as you all know, that's the best time to listen to a show of this genre, is at night, in the dark, when you can focus on what's going on over the speakers or in your ears in the headphones. Great time to hear the show. CJMQ 88.9 FM, the voice of the Eastern Townships, in Sherbrooke, Quebec, 1 hour south of my own hometown of Montreal. And they broadcast every Saturday from 10 p.m. to midnight. I want to say hi to David Teasdale. And if you're listening right now in Sherbrooke, merci beaucoup. Vous êtes très gentil. Thank you all so much for listening. And thank you all for making Night Fright the number one Canadian-based show of its genre. Coast to Coast is still up. I encourage you all to go to George Norrie's website, coasttocoast.com. coasttocoastam.com. I apologize. George was a guest here. He was kind enough to come on this show back in September. And if you like Night Fright, you're going to love Coast to Coast. Trust me on that one. There's a free plug for you, George. CJUM 101.5 FM, University of Manitoba, Winnipeg, Manitoba. Wednesday nights, Thursday mornings, 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. And I want to say hi to Jared McKittiak. Hope things are well with you, my friend, and the family's doing well.
You're listening to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. The time is now. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Now, I want to point you right away. We'll do some more of the call letters after, too, folks. Don't worry about that. We'll get to your station. I want to point you to the Night Fright website, www.nightfrightshow.com, www.nightfrightshow.com. As always, the most important thing there for you, folks, the archives. Now, why the archives? Because you're going to find all the shows we've just done on 2012 and tonight's show right there in the archives, free for you to download. There's no charge for any of this stuff. We put it out there for you for free. Download the shows. You are more than welcome to them. Stick them on your iPods. You're on your way to McGill University in Montreal and you're on the Metro. Perfect thing to listen to. You're out in BC and you're on your way to Simon Fraser. Perfect thing to listen to. No problem whatsoever. Wherever you are, even in the car. It sounds like a wherever you are, even in the car. Okay, I'll leave the music thing for another day. And I know, I heard y'all. Don't give up your day job, Brent. It's not nice. Not nice. I get no respect. Rodney Dangerfield. All that to tell you, folks, have fun with these shows. I mean, there's a whole wealth of information there. As you all know, we do a lot of conspiracy stuff on this show. More than any other show, we do the conspiracy thing. We did a whole special on first-person witnesses last November on JFK. We had people that were right in DEALEY PLAZA that day. Dr. Robert McClelland was here. He was the fellow that worked on JFK 4 minutes after he was shot. You can't get any more real than that. Imagine having the opportunity to listen to the doctor that worked on Lincoln. You have that opportunity right now. Special announcement I want to mention, and we're going to come back to Dr. Bob Thiel and his book 2012 and the Rise of the Secret Sect. Special announcement, Ted Sorensen. Ted Sorensen was JFK's closest aide. I interviewed him a few weeks ago for another show I have called The Brent Holland Show. He was outstanding. He brought us right into the Oval Office for all the critical decisions that JFK went through. And basically it was the three of them at that point, folks. It was JFK, it was Bobby Kennedy, and then Ted Sorensen. Ted Sorensen was with JFK for 11 years before he was president. He was his speechwriter. And what a speechwriter he was. He was an advisor on policy. The three of them got together in an office during the Oval Office during the Cuban Missile Crisis when we were that close to ending it all. And he pulled out some amazing words that caused Khrushchev to react and back off and virtually saved the world. That's coming up. And wait till you hear what he has to say about the assassination. Riveting. He does not believe Oswald was a one lone nut assassin. Not at all. Tune in for that show. It's coming up.
You're listening to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. The time is now. And now your host, Brent Holland.
And we're back. We're speaking with Dr. Bob Thiel, his book, of course, 2012 and the Rise of the Secret Sect. Bob, before we left off, I wanted to ask you a question. I want to go into the Christian book of Revelations and what we can derive from those prophecies and perhaps start to fill in a few of the pieces of the puzzles and the gaps to get a more complete picture of what's coming up in our future. Would you mind speaking about that?
Oh, no problem.
Thanks, Bob.
Actually, that was one of the things that I've done in the book.
Yes.
Chapter 16 of the book, I
That's
actually list non-biblical prophecies, and then I show how they line up with biblical ones.
Let me plug your book one more time. 2012 and the Rise of the Secret Sect. Our guest tonight, the author, Dr. Bob Thiel. The book can be got. Folks, get this book. Chapters in to go right across the country. Sorry, Bob, to cut you off.
No, that's fine. I was just going to say, in the book, I try to show people and line these things up, because I've had issues where I've had people who say, I only believe the Bible, I don't want to see anything else. And I said, well, that's fine, but the Apostle Paul quoted Greek poets to people to get them to understand.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's other people that don't want to hear the Bible, they only want to hear other ones. And in the book, I try to show how a lot of these line up. But for example, the Mayan prediction about this great amount of heat, that's predicted in the book of Revelation. Okay, so that was written before the Mayans, by the way. Mayans didn't know how to write when the book of Revelation was written. Book of Revelation was written probably about 90, 95 AD, and it talks about a time of great heat coming.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing, though, that I guess is very interesting is that most people have heard that the Bible talks about somebody called a beast and the false prophet, and there's somebody who's also the Antichrist.
666.
And that's those, the beast and the false prophet are mentioned throughout the book of Revelation. Well, when I started to do this research originally, and I started on this probably about 6 years ago, I noticed that there were other prophecies from different cultures that seemed to talk about the same kind of thing. For example, the Hindus have a prophecy that says a leader called the Great Kalki is going to rise up. Okay, they don't say this guy's a Hindu. They just say he's going to rise up. Mm-hmm. And they say that the common person needs to take up arms or weapons to support this guy. You say, okay, well, whatever. That sounds like an isolated thing. But you tie that into the book of Revelation, where you talk about a military leader called the Beast, and says, who is like the Beast, who can make war with him? That's Revelation 13:4. Then it says, oh, maybe it's the same guy. Then, and I also quote this in the book, there are Chinese prophecies from the Tang Dynasty. This is the 600 and 900 AD time frame. And the Chinese have prophecies that say, beautiful people are going to come from the West. Well, Europe would be West of China.
Sure would.
And then it says, China now has a saint. Well, Chinese don't have saints, but this prophecy says they will. This is a Chinese prophecy. And then it says, but he's not that great of a hero. Now, how could the Chinese have a saint, which they don't, who comes from the West, who's not that great of a hero? Well, that sounds a lot like this this false prophet that's talked about in the book of Revelation, the latter part of chapter 13.
Yeah.
So I started to see that tied in. So to me, that was absolutely fascinating. And then, to get even into more detail, I started to read some books on Catholic, Roman Catholic, and Byzantine prophecies. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know how familiar your audience may be with those, but if you don't mind, just take a minute to give it a little background.
That'd be perfect, because some will and some won't, of course.
Okay. The Roman Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox Catholics believe over the centuries that God has spoken through mystics, through apparitions claiming to be Mary, through monks, through priests, or whatever. Okay? And a lot of these prophecies. Matter of fact, I own 30 volumes of them. So I've read quite a few. Mm-hmm. Well, anyway, what they basically say is, according to these prophecies, at the time of the end, Catholics won't be good Catholics. Okay, and if you talk to the average Catholic, they'll say, yeah, there's not a lot of good Catholics right now. But according to these predictions, this is going to upset God. And according to these predictions, God is going to punish basically the European Catholics originally with civil unrest in Europe. So that's what these prophecies talk about, that there'll be civil unrest in Europe. There might be civil riots. Paris could be destroyed. Some cities in Germany might be destroyed. Some other parts of Europe. Even Rome itself could possibly be sacked according to these prophecies. Well, according to more of them, this will result in military leaders rising up in Europe. But one of them will be a special leader. And according to these prophecies, he will establish a new order within Catholicism. In other words, he's going to change the Catholic religion.
Whoa.
And people who read the book of Revelation are starting to say, hey, this might sound like this beast power. Well, anyway, it goes further. Not only will this guy change the religion a little bit, his change will offend much of the Catholic clergy. Okay, so he's going to change religion, but according to other Catholic prophecies, a pope who does miracles will say this is the guy. He is the great leader. He is the great monarch, is the term that's usually used in Catholic prophecies. And according to these predictions, this leader will be crowned the head of a Holy Roman Empire, a revived Roman Empire like they used to have in Europe in the old days. And from a destruction of the world perspective, apparently this leader is supposed to destroy the English-speaking peoples. That would be, by the way, Americans and Canadians and Brits and some others.
But not Quebec. I'm sorry, I had to throw that in, but not Quebec. That's a whole... sorry, I didn't mean to throw... Because they're trying to separate, anyways, because I come from Montreal and I'm an Anglophone, and anyway, whatever.
That's right, I'm aware. Anyway, that he will destroy the English-speaking peoples, then he will destroy the Muslims, and then he'll take over the world, basically, and that the Chinese will become this version of Catholic. Now, what's interesting about these prophecies is that there are books I have by certain Catholic authors who think this is a good thing. But I will tell you this, I have yet to talk to a Catholic in North America who thinks the United States and Canada being destroyed is a good thing, number one. And number two, this is where it's important to read more than one set of Catholic prophecies.
Yes, sir.
Other Catholic prophecies warn at the time of the end, there may be a false pope, what they call an anti-pope, somebody who doesn't really believe the Catholic faith. Well, that's kind of consistent with this false prophet that the book of Revelation talks about. And furthermore, some Catholic prophecies say that an anti-pope is due, and other Catholic prophecies, and I hope you're sitting down for this one, other Catholic prophecies say there's only one pope left. There was a Catholic saint, Malachi of Ireland, in 1129 AD, right, claimed to have a vision of all the remaining popes. And he wrote something down in Latin about every one of them. But his list includes a few anti-popes. Well, anyway, he wrote down 112 popes. And the current pope, Pope Benedict XVI, by the way, is number 111. So if that Catholic prophecy is correct, then the Catholics only have one pope remaining.
One to go.
And if the Catholic prophecies about an anti-pope rising up are correct,
yes, sir,
it would have to be the next one, if both of those sets of prophecies are correct. And if so, that would tie into sometime around 2012 to 2020, somewhere around that time frame. Unless something extraordinary happens, Pope Benedict XVI is in his 80s. He's probably not going to live forever. We haven't had a Catholic pope who's done that so far. And so there's a very good chance that his replacement could be, if the Catholic prophecies are correct, the final pope and the anti-pope that some other Catholic prophecies have warned about.
Explosive.
And that ties into the book of Revelation about this false prophet rising up.
Wow, that's explosive.
You're listening to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. The time is now. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Folks, our guest tonight, I told you, you're going to want to get this book, Dr. Bob Thiel, 2012, The Rise of the Secret Sect. Chapters Indigo, right across the country, www.nightfrightshow.com. Click on the book cover, right to Chapters Indigo, order it. Get this book. It's explosive. Is there any chance... I'm no fan of this current pope, I got to be honest. The previous pope, I didn't agree with everything he said, but when I saw him and looked in his eyes, you could see the humanity, the love just emanating out of him. And I'm not Catholic or anything, but there was a humanity there. This current pope, I struggle with this guy. Many things he says I vehemently disagree with, and there doesn't seem to be much of... I can't say human, but a warm human being there. Is there any chance that this could be the anti-pope, I guess, is what I'm asking?
I don't think so, and I comment that in the book. There's one or two points that or doctrines that he's focused on, which I believe differ from the early traditions of the Catholic Church, and I point those out in my book.
Yes, sir.
But I do not believe he's the guy. But there are other Catholic prophecies, by the way, that seem to talk about the second to last pope, and they could be talking about him. There's actually one that talks about a pope who flees to Germany.
Really?
Well, the current pope is German.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, I don't know if those particular Catholic prophecies are going to come to pass, because those aren't mentioned in the book of Revelation, and they're not mentioned in some other places that I would tend to look at. But there are some predictions that suggest that this particular pope might fulfill certain Catholic prophecies. And there are, I'd say, 3 or 4 things that I do believe might apply to him directly. But my primary concern about him from a doctrinal perspective, first, I guess, let me step back for a second. Sure. We've got to be careful in this age of television. Just because somebody doesn't look as warm as somebody else doesn't necessarily mean that, they're diabolical. No,
I understand that, and I guess I went too far when it's just I have a strong disliking for this guy. I don't know what it is. As I said before, I'm not Catholic or anything, but when, the previous Pope, Pope John Paul, there was love in his heart. There was something very, very special about that man, and I just don't see anything. When I think of Christ, because I do believe in Jesus, I think of a warm, like a John Paul type of figure, very warm, emanating love everywhere. I don't see that in this current Pope, and I guess I went too far when I said could he be the anti-Pope?
Well, but your comment isn't that far up. I understand that within the Catholic faith, there are people who believe that this current Pope is not a faithful Catholic. There was a statement made by Pope... was it Paul VI or Pius VI? I think it was Paul VI in 1972, where he made some comment to the effect that he saw some smoke from Satan entering the Catholic Church in 1972. Ooh. And some people actually believe that has to do with the third secret of Fatima.
I was going to ask you about that.
Some people believe that from then on, a falseness entered the Catholic Church. Now, this is within Catholic practitioners. So there are some Catholic practitioners who believe that the current Pope is not faithful. I will comment that while I disagree with what he wrote about the millennium, because I think that does not agree with the original teachings of his church, I think basically he believes in Catholicism, and I don't think he is the type of person who would intentionally betray his faith. Whereas, and again, I don't know who his predecessor is going to be, and I don't know if his predecessor is truly the last pope, but if his predecessor truly is this last pope, and the one that the Bible would call the false prophet, this would be somebody who wouldn't even believe the Catholic faith. We'll just see. But again, I don't think it's Benedict XVI. He's relatively old now. Remember, I mentioned a few moments ago there were some prophecies about the second to last pope.
That's right.
Some of them talk about the fact that he's old, he's getting weak, he's got to go to Germany. Just a lot of things that sound like this guy, as opposed to the last pope.
Let me I was just going to throw this out. Can I just throw something out? Speculation from you. Do you think that there could be those in the background, perhaps pulling some of the strings to this pope that may not have the best intentions?
Oh, absolutely.
Interesting.
I am convinced that there are people within the Vatican who are not that into their own religion. Look, the head exorcist in the Catholic Church, it was in a book, and it was reported about a month ago, went on record. He's like in his 80s, so he's not like some new kid who just came out of seminary or something. He said that there are cardinals and bishops in the Catholic Church who don't even believe in Jesus Christ.
Whoa.
Okay. You can look that up on the news wires. He actually said that. He said, in his opinion, Satan had entered the church and there were cardinals and bishops who didn't believe in Christ. And I believe that if the next pope is the last one, and he's the anti-pope and all that stuff, he'll go out and say he believes all kinds of stuff, but that he really won't. So, yeah, I believe that within the walls of the Vatican, there are people who don't really believe what they profess. And it's not just my opinion. The Vatican's chief The Exorcist said it. I've read some of the negotiations between the Vatican and other faiths, and I would suggest that some of the people negotiating perhaps don't really hold to the Catholic faith the way most Roman Catholics would think they should hold to it.
Wow. I told you, folks, you know, this is turning out to be quite a night. Get the coffee going. You don't want to miss the rest of this. This is incredible stuff we're being told tonight.
You're listening to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. The time is now. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Our guest tonight, Dr. Bob Thiel, the book 2012 and the Rise of the Secret Sect. Now, you're going to want to get this book without question, without hesitation. Easy way to get it, www.nightfrightshow.com, www.nightfrightshow.com. Click on that book cover, order it online. Simply go down the chapters Indigo and buy it. As I said before, I was there yesterday, readily available on the shelves right across the country. It's a popular book. What can we say? This is unnerving. It is completely unnerving because if there's one thing the vast majority of Christians put their faith in, even non-Christians, is the Catholic Church and the Church itself and the Pope. All of a sudden, we're being told to be very, very prudent, either with this Pope or the next Pope. It's completely unnerving. How do you deal with it on a personal level with your faith?
Well, when I started to read the prophecies, I'd already heard from non-Catholic sources, people who had said that the final Antichrist would be a pope. Mm-hmm. And that's been going on for a long time. And so that was not a new idea. So that of itself, I was familiar with. But what really surprised me was when I went past some of the Catholic prophecy books that kind of overlooked that. And I read more and more details in these Catholic prophecies. I said, wait a second. A lot of Catholic leaders, mystics or whatever, mm-hmm. have foretold a time where an unfaithful pope may take over the Vatican. And it's funny because usually when the term anti-pope is used in Catholic circles, it just means somebody who wasn't elected to be the pope. So the other anti-popes throughout history, by the way, I think most of them believe the Catholic faith, okay? Mm-hmm. But this one's different because I've read at least one of the predictions says that the guy's actually going to get in there correctly. And so he's not an anti-pope in the sense he wasn't properly voted in, but an anti-pope in the sense that he doesn't really believe the Catholic doctrine. How do I deal with it?
Yes, sir.
Well, I believe that biblical and non-biblical prophecies point to a time when civilization as we know it will end. And then ultimately, we will have an age of peace. Unfortunately, as I said at the beginning of the hour, I'm afraid we're going to have tribulation and warfare prior to that age of peace. And I remember telling my family a few years ago, I said, the last few years before the end, it might be really rough. And unfortunately, I think we're getting very close to that.
Whoa. This is incredible stuff tonight, folks. I'm going to do another break right now. I'm going to read some more call letters of the shows that syndicate us. When we come back, I want to talk about how you're preparing in the next few years for this tumultuous time that's going to be upon us. And I also want to get to the I Ching in the next half hour, if that's okay with you. Folks, I'm glued to my seat. That's all I can say. I'm sitting here with goosebumps time and time again. Very unnerving show. If you're sitting home alone, you may want to put the lights on, but put the put the coffee pot on as well, because you don't want to miss the end of this show. This is riveting stuff, folks. Our guest tonight, Dr. Bob Thiel. We're talking about 2012, of course, and his book, The Rise of the Secret Sect, 2012, and The Rise of the Secret Sect, readily available, because it's a popular book, at Chapters Indigo. Go to the www.nightfrightshow.com website. Click on the book cover. As always, we'll take you right to Chapters Indigo online. As with all the books from all the guests, take you right to Chapters Indigo or a place where you can pick it up. Highly recommend this book, without question.
You're listening to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. The time is now. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Folks, you're listening to Night Fright, of course. I'm your host, Brent Holland, and we are broadcasting live out of Sudbury, Ontario, as usual. Laurentian University's between 10 and midnight. You're also listening to Sound FM 100.3, University of Waterloo in Waterloo, Ontario, and they broadcast Tuesday nights, Wednesday mornings, 3 shows there, 2 a.m. to 6 a.m., 3 shows back to back. And I know you truckers that are traveling across the Trans-Canada and traveling across the 401 love this stuff. And I know you go to the Night Fright website and download all the archives of the shows. Thank you so much for your emails. Road Dog, my good buddy Road Dog, he's over at the University of Waterloo, and great guy over there. If you ever get a chance to get down to the offices there, say hey to Road Dog. Terrific guy. You're also listening to CKXU 88.3 FM, the University of Lethbridge, in Lethbridge, Alberta. Another beautiful campus in Canada. Canada has all these beautiful, amazing universities. Some of them are right in major urban areas like McGill, I had mentioned before. Concordia is the same thing in Montreal, University of Toronto, of course. But a lot of them are like Laurentian University, snuggled neatly in a beautiful country setting. We're just really lucky to have this kind of peace and tranquility to do our studying in. I mean, Laurentian University even has its own beach. I don't recommend going down there tonight, folks, but certainly it's just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful campuses here in Canada. Winnipeg, Manitoba, University of Manitoba, CJUM, 100.5 FM, and that's Wednesday nights, Thursday mornings, 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. CIVL 88.7 FM, that's the University of the Fraser Valley in Abbotsford, BC. Want to say hey to everybody out in Abbotsford and in British Columbia in general. British Columbia loves Night Fright. I think we have 7 or 8 different stations out in British Columbia. Just wonderful. Thank you so much for your support. Send those emails. I read them all the time. You can send them to nightfrightshow@gmail.com. And they broadcast every Thursdays from 2 p.m. to Friday, and Friday mornings at 2 a.m. And I want to say hi to Eamons Evans, Gerald the Hutchman. He's over at Salamo Radio in Salamo in Ymir, British Columbia. And the call letters there are CFAD 92.1 FM. And they broadcast every Saturday evening from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. Christopher Earl, how you doing, buddy? Hope things are well with you. He's over at CFUR 88.7 FM, University of Northern British Columbia. Prince George, British Columbia. Gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous Prince George, British Columbia. Friday nights, Saturday mornings, 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. I'm going to read some more after, folks. Got a bunch more to do.
You're listening to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. The time is now. And now your host, Brent Holland.
I want to point you again to the www.nightfrightshow.com, www.nightfrightshow.com. Once again, click on those archives. I want to tell you what's coming up, though, on Night Fright as I open up the link. There we go. Vampires coming up. We're going to have some fun. Actually, next week, I got some news for you. For those of you that are in the Sudbury area, I'm doing a live show next week at a place called SRO, but there still will be a show here broadcast live next week. And let me tell you about this show. It's 2 shows in one. The first hour, I've interviewed a fellow by the name of Frenchy Brulette. He's got a book out. He was a mafioso guy in New Orleans, and right away there's a red flag in the JFK thing going up, eh? Oh, yeah. Because New Orleans, where it all took place, Jim Garrison and all those guys. He was a mafioso. He's got all the street rumors and legends about the JFK assassination. He names names of the shooters. Oh yeah, baby, right here on Night Fright. Next week, the first hour. The second hour, this is an interview I've already done, and I'm not going to give away the ending. I had a wonderful guest on. His name is Vin Smith. He has another radio show similar to this format on the internet. He did a past life regression with me, and what I found out was extremely, extremely explosive, and yet it made a lot of sense. That will be revealed next week. The week after that, we're going to be looking at vampires. Indeed, there's going to be vampires here. Great author from Montreal, Nancy Kilpatrick, and she's got a book out called Evolve. We're going to be looking at that. Something that's very creepy. J.M. Dixon has a book, and he's got a book called The Wiser Field Guide to Vampire Legends, Practices, Encounters, Old and New. It's a whole dictionary and encyclopedia of all the vampire lore. Incredible research. Lots of great stuff coming up. For those of you that are living on campus right now, that are in the dormitories and stuff, and right after this, we're going to come back to our guest tonight, Dr. Bob Thiel. Campus Chills in May. Now, Campus Chills is it's more than that. It's 12 different stories based on true stories and true stories themselves of campus ghost stories and creepy things that happened on campuses. We're going to be talking to a few of those authors, well-known authors like Kelly Armstrong, Mark Leslie, etc., well-known Canadian authors. Steve Vernon, of course, he's been on this show several times, one time talking about his books. Great writers and all these so I'm just telling you, if you're going to be around for that show, keep the lights on. Get your friends over, have some fun, and listen to the ghost stories. It's going to creep you out, without doubt.
You're listening to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. The time is now. And now your host, Brent Holland.
We're back. We're speaking tonight with Dr. Bob Thiel. His book, of course, 2012, and The Rise of the Secret Sect. And that book can be got at www.nightfrightshow.com. Right on the website, there's a book cover. You're going to see it, 2012, The Rise of the Secret Sect. Click on that. It's going to take you to Chapters Indigo. You can order right from the comfort of your own home, or go down the Chapters Indigo and pick it up. Bob, before the break, I had a question I wanted to pose to you. And I wanted to get to the I Ching, but I also wanted to know, what are you doing to prepare for the end of the world in the next few years? What are you doing to prepare yourself?
Well, there's lots of things.
Can I just ask you, are you doing similar things to what Patrick Garrels, folks, was our guest last week, who has quit his job with 4 or 5 other people. They bought some land at the top of a mountaintop in Spain, and he believes the end of the world, and that's the only place to survive. Do you fall into that camp completely, or do you think it's going to be more of a survivable than that?
Kind of in between.
Okay, fair enough.
All right. Basically, as I said, I don't believe that Patrick Garrell will be proven correct. I think he will find that while civilization as we know it will end, it will not end prior to December 21st, 2012. I think he's premature. And I also don't believe that it's going to be a flood. And I know they also, I think some people associated with him also have some property in Africa someplace that they're looking to go to.
That's right. Yeah, they mentioned that as well as a backup place.
From my personal perspective, it gets a bit more complex than that. First of all, I believe that biblical and non-biblical prophecies and world events are suggesting that the U.S. dollar, for example, will eventually be worthless. And I will also add, I believe the Canadian dollar will fall into that category as well.
Oh, joy. And, something to look forward to.
Well, you have to ask, for my, what,
yeah, I understand,
what I do. Well, one thing is I try to take that into consideration. So from a business perspective, I'm always looking at business opportunities that are not as linked to the U.S. or Canada as perhaps in the past.
Interesting.
That would be one personal thing.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly,
it's good advice.
I believe that when it is very close to the end, there will be a place of protection on the earth. The book tells where we think it might be, but we're not absolutely certain. And this is, again, based on primarily biblical prophecies, but also some non-biblical ones as well. So we believe that some people will be protected in a particular location. While we don't think it's wrong that people should have, I think everybody should have a few weeks worth of food and water. I'm not a survivalist in the sense that I think that if you hunker down someplace with enough food and enough guns, that's going to be enough to protect you. That may prolong your life a short period of time, but I don't believe that could be long enough. But mainly what I'm doing is kind of not as much from the physical perspective, but as much as trying to get the message out that some of these things are happening. Later in the show, perhaps we can go through some of the events that have happened, for example, since the book has come out.
Absolutely.
I've done dozens of radio interviews all across Canada and the U.S. I'm trying to do some other ones. I was just in South America last week or two ago. I'm getting my book is being translated into another language now. It's currently in English, also Spanish, also German, and now, hopefully in about a month, Portuguese.
Congratulations. That's great.
Thanks. So we're trying to get this out all over the world to a lot of an audience as we can, to tell people things that we think are going to happen. So my primary focus is more that, as opposed to, can I buy a piece of property in Timbuktu or something?
Okay.
But I will make it clear, there are some people who have 2012 books who don't really believe in the end of the world. I do not put Patrick Garrell in that category, and he has my respect that I do believe he believes it.
Oh, absolutely. And I certainly didn't mean to diss him at all, because
No, I know I didn't say you did, but okay. I've done other interviews, and they've told me that they've talked to other guests who write about 2012, and they don't really believe this stuff. I believe what I'm telling you. I do believe in the end of the world, but I don't believe. I think 2012 is a little bit too soon. Again, with the one specific event I told you about, that a particular peace deal hasn't happened yet. And however, once that happens, I think the clock will be absolutely clear. I think the clock is ticking now, but I'm not certain as to totally when it expires. But when that peace deal happens, I think more and more people will probably pay attention.
I think so too, and now you're going to have me looking for it every day in the news. Although, you know what? When you said that, like I said before, I think it's already happened, and that's what scares me. I think it was. Well,
I don't think it's quite there, but I think that actually one of the events that have happened since my book has come out is that.
Let's go into that now. Then let's go. Yeah.
Yeah, the Europeans specifically want to be. They have told Israel that they are going to be the ones who are going to do a peace deal. They basically have told them that they're going to do it, and they've started to tell the Arabs that. And as far as the Americans, they don't tell the Americans and Canadians, look, we're going to force a peace deal on you. But I think they've made it clear to the U.S. specifically, and I think as well Canada, that they intend to be part of a peace arrangement there. And that's something that they've already said that they want to do. And there was actually a meeting in Germany. I think it was February. I don't think it was March. I think it was last month, where they're talking again about a peace deal that they want to make. So the rumblings of this peace deal have already happened. So, and the other part that's kind of interesting, and I think I cite this in my book, in Israel, they've actually said, it's been reported in the press that, we in Israel may not be able to rely on the United States to protect us. We're going to have to make a peace deal with Europeans. We want Europe involved in a peace deal to keep us safe from the Islamic threat, I presume, is what they are trying to be safe from.
Yeah, maybe Ahmadinejad.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
Well, he
all of the above.
What he says, a lot of people thought Hitler was a nut.
Yeah.
he didn't really mean this stuff. History has basically said when people say they're going to try to wipe people off the map, when they get a chance, they do it.
Pretty much. Yep. You got to take them at their face value, as they say.
Right, and I believe that there are some extremists within the Islamic community that want to do it. Of course, there are a lot of moderates who don't want to do that, and that's great. But
they're not the ones we have to worry about. It's kind of like looking at Christianity and the KKK. We don't worry about the average Christian, but we do worry about white supremacists and the KKK.
And that's what I was going to say. You don't have to worry about the average Catholic either.
Exactly.
Like
Precisely.
This great monarch beast power person apparently isn't going to really believe the faith that he claims to be, that he's in. So, I don't want to make it sound like I'm really talking about Muslims.
No, and it certainly didn't come across that way, Bob. Not at all.
You're listening to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. The time is now. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Our guest tonight, folks, Bob Thiel. I'm sure you're glued to your chair just as I am. And aren't you glad I recommended getting that coffee going? Because this is explosive stuff. 2012 is his book, 2012 and the Rise of the Secret Sect. And we're talking about things now that have happened since he's released his book. And this book is not old, folks. It's only several months old. What other things have happened, Bob?
Well, here's the first one. And this was kind of funny because most of my focus was on 2012 to 2020. And so I wasn't thinking about what would happen before then. But the day my book was announced, and my book talks about that the U.S. dollar will no longer be the world's reserve currency, all right? Mm-hmm. The day my book is announced, the Wall Street Journal says that a committee of the United Nations said the U.S. dollar needs to be dropped as the world's reserve currency.
Oh, my God.
So I thought that was kind of interesting.
That's right.
Now, one radio show I did, the guy said, that was a lucky guess. My kid could have said that. I said, okay, fine. But that was the first one. The second one, though, is interesting. My book says that the Vatican is going to compromise and do whatever it can to try to attract Protestants and ultimately have an ecumenical council where it will bring in the Eastern Orthodox. And on October 20th, the Vatican announced that they would make a deal with the Anglicans. The Vatican would amend their constitution that the Anglicans could become Catholic. They didn't have to get rebaptized. Their priests, the Anglican priests would be considered Catholic priests. The priests could be married. They could go to the same church buildings. They could have the same rituals, the same ceremonies, and all this would be fine as long as the Anglican priests get touched on the head one other time. And the reason this is interesting is that this never happened before. Now, my book does not say that on October 20th, the Anglicans are going to be offered a deal. Okay, I want to make that clear.
No, I understand.
But my book does say deals are going to be offered. And the part about this is fascinating is that in the late 1800s, the Pope said the Anglican orders are all invalid. None of it, basically, their baptisms don't count. Nothing counts from those people. And now, lo and behold, in the 21st century, on October 20th, it was announced, look, we'll take the Anglicans, and they can be just like this. And my book warns Protestants, evangelicals, Orthodox, and others that, look, deals are going to be made. Don't fall for this. And it warns Catholics, by the way. Catholics, people are going to compromise your religion. Watch this. Your own prophets have warned that this is going to happen. Don't fall for it.
Beware.
The reason I want to emphasize that is because I don't want to sound like I'm Catholic bashing here, because I'm not. I'm trying to tell Catholics that their prophecies warn that their church is going to compromise. And there are Catholic prophets that say that the final Antichrist is going to adopt the name Catholic for his religion. And so when that happened on October 20th, to me that was like, wow. You know, this, I figured something like that would happen, but this was pretty soon. Probably, however, one of the biggest things that happened, even bigger than that, if you can believe this, is when my book was written, there was something called the Lisbon Treaty. Mm-hmm, now, for your listeners, let me explain what that is.
Please. Mm-hmm.
Over in Europe, they have something called the European Union, which is basically, until recently, kind of a club where there's 27 countries. They get together, and they try to agree on things that are good for their economies. Okay? When my book was written, if you were one of those 27 countries in the European Union, if the European Union passed some rule that you didn't want, you didn't have to obey it. You could say because of culture, because of religion, because of the economy, because of preference, that you could be exempt from some of the rules.
You could opt out of it. Mm-hmm.
And that's how the European Union was for a long time. Well, when my book was written or published, quite a few countries had signed something called the Lisbon Treaty. Now, the Lisbon Treaty basically is sort of a European constitution, except it's not called a constitution. But when my book came out, the Irish had voted against it. The Poles hadn't signed it, and the head of the Czech Republic said he wouldn't sign it. And then that treaty was going to expire, by the way. If it wasn't signed by November of 2009, the whole treaty expired and would never go into effect. Well, in October, first week of October, second week of October, the Irish voted a second time. And guess what? They approved the Lisbon Treaty.
Huh.
All right? So that's interesting. Then the Poles signed it, Poland agreed to it. Now, here's the other part that was in my book. My book said that the United States government was going to encourage the formation of a European superpower. So what happened? After all this happened, the United States sent Vice President Joe Biden to the Czech Republic. 10 days later, the Supreme Court, or their equivalent of there in the Czech Republic, told the president that he needed to sign it. So I saw him the first week of November. I saw him on BBC America. He signed it. Now, he spoke in the Czech language, which I don't speak, so it was translated for me in English. And what was translated on the news was, quote, "I have just signed away the sovereignty of the Czech Republic." So he realized when he signed this that the European Union would now become a much more powerful entity. And it's sort of like Canada or the United States. Instead of just being a bunch of provinces or a bunch of independent states, now with the Lisbon Treaty, Europe is now one entity.
One solid,
all
almost
27 countries who signed that treaty have agreed to ultimately adopt the euro, by the way, as their currency.
Oh.
Once their economies qualify, they have to adopt the euro. Plus, the other thing that's interesting is that there's a new president of Europe, by the way. His name is Herman Van Rompuy. He was selected behind closed doors. He became president of 500 million people on December 1st, 2009. Now, my book said a European empire would form. This treaty was signed. It went into effect. And what's hilarious, it's not hilarious, but it's frightening, if you will, people don't know this happened.
Yeah, I was unaware of it, too.
And in my something I think I may have sent you, I quoted the Wall Street Journal that said a tree fell in Europe and nobody heard it.
And nobody heard it. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
A new entity has formed. That Europe is no longer just a club. In the new year, in the old European Union, let's say there were three of us. And Brent, let's say me and you will be Catholics, and the third person is not. And so we're going to decide that everybody should eat fish on Friday. All right?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of a Catholic tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Well, anyway, in the old European Union, the third guy, his country didn't have to listen. Maybe they don't like fish. Maybe fish is too expensive there. I don't know. Well, under the new union, as long as 2/3 of us agree, there's no out.
They have to eat fish now, too.
They have to obey all the laws, right? They have to do, and that's not the way the old EU was. The old EU was, if you don't agree, you don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's only one way out, and that is you fill out a bunch of paperwork and do a bunch of other stuff. You can pull out of the union, but you can't pull out of any rule. And as more and more of these European countries get their economies integrated, and as more and more of them adopt the euro as their currency, who's going to pull out? They're not. So they're going to be sort of like the provinces in the U.S., and I mean in Canada, and the states in the United States. They're going to be under a federal government, a real federal government, which they haven't really had in Europe before. So the largest peacefully formed empire of all time happened on December 1st, and hardly anybody in the U.S. and Canada even knows about it. But my book said something like this is going to have to happen, and it has.
And it has. Oh, man.
Right. Now, I'm not saying that the current government is the final form that they're going to do, but they have to get together in order to get together.
and the steps that you mentioned in the book are happening, and that's what's scaring me. Folks, our guest tonight, Dr. Bob Thiel. I'm pretty scared after listening to Bob tonight, I have to tell you. 2012 and the Rise of the Secret Sect is the book. We're talking about 2012, of course, and some of the prophecies. And it's pretty ominous stuff. I hope you're staying up for this because this is the real deal. This is really good stuff. Bob, let's talk a little bit about some more of the prophecies, the I Ching. Now, this is something in the 4 shows that we've done we haven't touched on before, but I would like to bring it up now because I think it's an important element that will add another piece to the puzzle, as I mentioned before. Can we talk a little bit about that, my friend?
Certainly.
Thank you.
Basically, the I Ching, or the Book of Changes, is kind of a way that in China they kind of predict the future. Now, to use the I Ching, there are 3 discs. Imagine just having 3 coins, let's say 3 quarters. and they have a head side and a tail side.
Mm-hmm.
They don't call it heads and tails in China, but it's still the same kind of thing. Well, you can throw these 3 coins and see what you get. You might get 2 heads and a tail, 1 tail and 2 heads, and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, there's 64 combinations of responses you can get. And so in the book, once you throw these coins or discs, you look them up, and it tells you essentially your fortune. Okay, so you wonder about something. And so they do this in China, and they still do this. They've been doing this for thousands of years, I think, because the Taoists did it and the Confucianists did it, so they've been around a long time. So, and it's still done now. So they've got this book. Well, there are a couple of guys called the McKenna brothers who said, if you do all these 64 times every possibility you could ever add up and whatever, and you start counting from the day the United States dropped a nuclear bomb in Hiroshima, this brings you into 2012. Now, originally, they said the I Ching is predicting the end of the world. But now that's kind of reading something into the I Ching, because it doesn't really say that it's predicting the end of the world. But the McKenna brothers thought that was fascinating when they did their math with it, and they ended up with this date. Now, originally, they came up to November of 2012, but then after the Mayan prophecies got a bit more popular, and December 2012 became more prominent, somebody redid the calculation and said it ended up in December of 2012. I didn't go back and actually add the days up myself to find out if it ended up in November or December. I can just tell you originally it was supposed to be in November. So some believe that subconsciously the I Ching was supposed to be predicting the world will end in 2012. So that's basically what that has to do with.
Another arrow pointing towards it. So there you go, folks. That was something I wanted to get to actually in the first show of our 2012 series. It took to the last show, but that's the best way. Bob did it perfectly there. Appreciate that. Thank you for that.
You're listening to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. The time is now. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Can we talk about Fatima and the
Certainly.
3 prophecies? Because I think this is important, and I think it's profound, and there's 3 prophecies, folks, and the 3rd prophecy was revealed in 2000, I think it was, or 2001, and I don't believe what was revealed by the Vatican was the actual prophecy. I think they're holding back on us. I think they're still holding out on us. I think it's catastrophic. But let's talk about it a little bit with Bob Thiel in the book 2012, The Rise of the Secret Sect. Thanks, Bob.
Okay, well, for your listeners, if you wouldn't mind, maybe I should give a little background on Fatima.
That'd be terrific. Thank you.
Fatima is a location in Portugal. And what happened was, on May 13th, 1917, there were 3 children. Lucia, Jacinta, and Jacinta's brother. His name's not coming to mind.
Oh, yeah,
right
the
now.
little guy. The three kids.
Right. And
Yeah.
His last name was Fernandez, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Anyway, so they saw this apparition. And the apparition didn't say it was Mary or anything, but it basically said, on the 13th of every month, you guys need to come back here, and I'm going to reveal more and more to you. Okay? Well, on July 13th, 1917, this apparition revealed what we're usually referred to as the 3 secrets, or 1 secret with 3 parts. The first part was essentially that unless the world repented, there would be another world war, or there'd be a world war. The second was that unless Russia repented, essentially there would be Russian atheism or communism. And one of the things that the apparition told the children was that the oldest one, Lucia, that she would live a long time, basically, but the 2 younger children would die first, and they did. Okay? So because of that, a lot of people were watching it. And then this apparition basically said it would make itself public, or do something in public, on October 13th, 1917, and something like 50,000 people went to see this.
That's right.
And it was rainy, and there was some kind of, according to the reports, because obviously I wasn't there, I wasn't born there.
All right, folks, all right.
Anyway, that there was some kind of a sun movement in the sky that was unheard of, impossible. And
yeah, it was zigzagging and stuff, folks.
Right,
yeah.
So therefore, something really happened. So basically, the oldest sister, Lucia, who became a Catholic nun or sister, by the way, revealed to people those first two prophecies. But she was told not to, by this apparition, who later claimed to be Mary, that she should not reveal the rest of it until a later time. So what happened was she wrote this letter in 1944 that she delivered to a local bishop, I guess, who tried to send it to the Vatican a couple of times. And finally, somebody in the Vatican took a look at it around 1960. The Pope at the time did. And he decided not to do much with it or anything with it. Then later, when there was the assassination attempt on Pope John Paul II, when he heard some testimony from the Turkish shooter of him, some statements that the Turkish shooter made, the Pope felt that somehow this guy was fulfilling one of the Fatima prophecies in this third secret. And so the Pope got interested, and he actually interviewed this guy. And then he decided, he had meetings with people like Cardinal Ratzinger, who is now Pope Benedict XVI, on what should we do about all this. And finally, in the year 2000, the Vatican decided to make public the letter that Lucia wrote in 1944. Now, it's on the Vatican's website, and it's in Portuguese, but they do translate it in English, for those of us who don't read Portuguese. And basically what this third secret says is that there will be some turmoil and a pope will be killed. And the reason this is sort of controversial is that supposedly Lucia told some people at the Vatican that what she wrote was a full secret, but if that was a full secret, what John Paul getting shot doesn't sound like that at all, because he didn't die.
Because he didn't die. That's right.
He didn't die. And the current Pope said that Fatima stuff is basically not, it's not foretelling the future. Well, I think it's supposed to foretell the future. And again, we haven't had a Pope who was killed. Now, I suppose people can argue maybe the Pope's heart stopped for an instant or something, but the Fatima prophecy doesn't say, the one at the Vatican's website, by the way, it doesn't say that he's going to stop breathing for a minute or something. It says he's going to be killed.
Going to be killed, yeah.
And so others have said, hey, then there's probably something more to this Fatima prophecy. And there are other people who have been on radio shows like this in the past. For example, a Catholic priest by the name of Malachi Martin and some others who said, there's more to this third secret.
With Art Bell.
Now, I know you want to do your end of the half-hour break?
No, it's okay. One of the beauties of doing this on the university/community radio network, even though there's a whack of stations out there, we don't have to pay attention to the clock at all. Let's keep going.
All right, because here's some other parts of this.
Let's go.
And that is, remember, there were 3 children. Well, the child, Jacinta, she apparently had a big mouth. In fact, she started spouting stuff out before she was supposed to. And Lucia didn't like this as much, but anyway. Well, anyway, she ended up with another nun who is known as Mother Gardenia. And people called her their godmother. And according to a letter that she wrote, I think in 1950, I want to say 54, but somewhere around that time frame, she wrote down basically a prophecy from Jacinta, in Portuguese, Jacinta, that is a little more expanded than what Lucia wrote. Okay, so other people say, look, this seems to be suggesting more like an anti-pope. And others say that Lucia did talk about an anti-pope, and that maybe when she said what she wrote in 1944 was complete, maybe she wasn't remembering everything, because she lived until her late 90s.
She didn't die that long ago, I don't think.
No, it wasn't that long ago.
Yeah.
And remember, this happened in 1913.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. So, yeah.
So some believe that the Vatican didn't reveal everything. Now, this is where I've got kind of a mixed deal. I believe that the letter that they put out on the internet is valid. I don't believe they made up the letter. I believe it is a valid letter. I believe that it is likely that Lucia wrote it, and I believe that the translation is reasonably faithful because I looked up 2 or 3 words in Portuguese to make sure they were right. Okay, because you can do that online. But as far as the rest, there have been other Catholic apparitions. There was one called the Lady of Our Rosary in 1978, and she said that the Fatima prophecy was that sin or Satan was going to enter the Vatican in 1972. And that also, from that letter from what Mother Gardenia wrote about Jacinta, said that sin or something was going to happen in the Vatican in 1972. And when you combine that with the statement by the Pope in 1972, right, when he said that the smoke of Satan had entered the Vatican, or Rome, in 1972, people say, wait a second, there's something more to this.
Absolutely. And I'm sitting here with goosebumps, my friend.
Is simple. My position is, whether the Fatima prophecy said an anti-pope is coming or not, there are many Catholic prophecies that warn about somebody coming and change the faith, that an anti-pope may come, that an anti-pope might be the Antichrist. Those are already out there, and they have nothing to do with Fatima. Nothing to do with Fatima. But some people believe that the Vatican wants to limit what they say about Fatima, because if people knew that if there was a Fatima prophecy that an anti-pope was going to rise up, then people would really be prepared for it. Because, to be blunt, while I told you about a lot of the prophecies, and they're documented in my book, Catholic Prophecies about an anti-pope, most Catholics don't know about that. But most Catholics do know about Fatima. So one belief out there amongst Fatima watchers is that the Vatican is just scared that if people realize that part of the third secret has to do with the Vatican betraying the Catholic faith or an anti-pope rising up, that when that the Vatican doesn't want people to look at that. And I'm not going to try to challenge or question the Vatican's motivations. I've never spoke to Pope Benedict XVI. I did see John Paul II in person.
Did you really?
I didn't talk to my sister in the audience. So I'm not going to question their motivations, but I will say this. There are, in my view, significant Catholic prophecies that warn that the Catholic Church a leader of the Catholic Church is going to betray the faith, probably be an anti-pope. And whether Fatima said it or not, I don't know. But I do know that other apparitions claiming to be Mary have said the same thing.
Whoa. This is an incredible show and an incredible guest tonight, folks. Our guest tonight, of course, Dr. Bob Thiel. His book, you're going to want to get this. All the stuff we've discussed tonight is in his book, 2012, and the Rise of the Secret Sect. Let me do this break, but when we come back, Bob, I want to ask you, you had mentioned that one of the popes would be killed. I didn't think of John Paul. I thought of the pope that John Paul replaced, the one that was only a pope for a month. I can't remember his name.
John Paul I.
He ended up dead after only a month, and many people think that was a conspiracy, but let's talk about that when we come back. Let me just do these last few. I guess I'll have time for maybe just a handful of these, and then when we come back, we'll discuss that. Folks, wow. I promised you a great show. Fantastic show. Our guest, of course, Dr. Bob Thiel. His book, readily available in any chapters Indigo right across the country. It's called 2012 and the Rise of the Secret Sect. As always, throw it again, www.nightfrightshow.com, www.nightfrightshow.com. Click on the book cover, get this book.
You're listening to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. The time is now. And now your host, Brent Holland.
You're listening to Night Fright. I'm your host, Brent Holland. You're also listening to CFUR 88.7 FM, University of Northern British Columbia. Prince George, British Columbia. Do this one again. That's okay. Friday night, Saturday mornings, 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. Hey, Christopher Earl. Hope things are well with you. Kurt Wetmore. He's over at CFXU 93.3 FM in St. Francis Xavier University in Antigonish, Nova Scotia. Saturday evenings, 10 p.m. to midnight. CIDO 97.7 FM, the voice of the valley. Where else but Creston, British Columbia, Thursdays, 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. What a great time to listen. Tim Davis. How you doing, bud? You're also listening to Radio Laurier, Sir Wilfrid Laurier University, CJHQ 107.1 FM in Nakasup, British Columbia. Where else? Let me just point you right away to the www.nightfrightshow.com, www.nightfrightshow.com. I'm doing this in Reader's Digest mode, as they say. I'm going as fast as I can. All the archives are there for you to download for free. There's shows on Bigfoot. There's shows on, how many of you knew Canada had its own Roswell? There's a show there on that. Stanton Friedman was here talking about Roswell. Who knew Stanton Friedman was a Canadian? Hands up. Great shows there. The whole series on 2012 will be there. Is there, I should say. Enjoy yourself. Download them. They're all free.
You're listening to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. The time is now. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Our guest tonight, of course, is Bob Thiel, his book, 2012 and the Rise of the Secret Sect, and I'm just looking at the time. Let's skedaddle and get right to it right away. Before the break, Bob, I had mentioned that, is there a possibility that it was John Paul I? Because there was very, very mysterious circumstances around his death, and I remember living through that because I'm of that vintage, and it was all hushed up. There was talk about the Vatican Bank being involved, and then all of a sudden, Pope John Paul I was going to do an investigation, and he ended up dead. Your speculation?
I've heard that. I don't know. It's basically mentioned that he was probably in weak health, and some people feel that they basically worked him to death. He didn't want the job, and they pressured into it. As far as I'd heard about the investigation of the Vatican Bank and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The question, though, that I think you asked me was, does this seem to be consistent with the Fatima prophecy?
Yes.
And it doesn't seem to be if you take it kind of literally.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay, it talks about arrows going out there, and I suppose you could say those are figurative. But I don't think that it would really necessarily apply to him. But I don't know for sure how he died, and the Vatican's its own sovereign state, so if they tell you, you can't really question their investigations, or you can. Legally, you can.
There's a lot of secretive stuff that goes on there, isn't there?
Well, it's I don't know if you've been there before, but it's a very interesting place. I was there in January. I was there last June. Mm-hmm. I've been to the Vatican, I don't even know how many times, 5, 6 times, I guess, 7 times.
Nice.
I always find it very, very, very interesting because there's a lot of things going on over there, and I'm always looking into history and prophecy and stuff when I'm over there. So I've been fascinated by that. But they're their own government, and so whenever they tell you on an investigation, it's a little different than in the U.S. or Canada. The Vatican does not have independent news sources who work for it, that are within Vatican City. Mm-hmm. And so they control the press more than the governments of Canada and the U.S. control theirs. So. And
what comes out. Folks, our guest, of course, Dr. Bob Thiel. Bob, where are you going to be December 21st, 2012?
My plan is to be in the United States. My guess, to be blunt, is I'm going to be on television or radio.
Has George spoke to you yet?
No.
George Norrie from Coast to Coast?
No, someone wants me to contact him. I just haven't gotten to it. But I have done interviews not on that station, but from Coast to Coast, of course. Mm-hmm. But no, I believe on that particular night I will be doing television or radio. I will tell people once again that I do not believe the world will end in the flood on that date. But what I do believe will happen, and perhaps this would be a good thing to kind of, as we get closer to wrapping up here, is I do believe when the world does not end in a flood, people associated with the New Age movement are going to go out and say that they were always right. They're going to say the world did not end in a flood, that they had always told everybody it wasn't going to end in a flood, that everybody who said it was wrong, therefore they are right, and therefore that they believe that a world of peace, an age of peace, if you will, is about to dawn on humankind. I, on the other hand, believe this is a false age of peace, a false declaration of peace, if you will, and that's consistent with both biblical prophecies, Catholic prophecies, Byzantine prophecies, and I think Chinese prophecies as well. There are, and even Islamic ones, there are prophecies from many cultures that say that a false age of peace is going to be declared. And my reading of those is that this is going to happen more than one time. Okay? And that's going to be one of these times. I think that's when those particular prophecies are going to be fulfilled. And that's what I'm certain is going to happen on December 22nd, 2012, is people of the New Age movement are going to stand up and say that they were right. And look, everybody wants to believe in peace.
Yeah.
You know the Chinese book, The Art of War. Basically, well, what it says is you want your enemy to think that it's all going to be peaceful. That's the way you win. You take the enemy by surprise, and because people do want peace, and most people want peace. I mean, war. Despite how some movies might make it sound, war is really tough.
Oh, it's horrible.
I had an uncle in Vietnam. He came back with shrapnel in his back.
Oh, no.
He told me about how much fun he had in Vietnam, and he didn't have any fun in Vietnam before he told me anyway. Fighting wars in the jungle, that's not fun. But most people want peace. And unfortunately, sometimes we've seen people want it so much that they'll overlook war being plotted underneath them. And I'm afraid that will be what's happening. Because I suspect that the peace deal that we were talking about earlier in the show will probably be in place by that time. Now, I'm not certain, but if my understanding of world history, biblical chronology, and other prophecies are correct, we should have that peace deal somewhere near that time frame, probably before it, but maybe shortly thereafter. So we'll have some idea when the world will end. But I know that's a long answer to your question, because my belief is I'm going to be on the radio or television, or both.
What's next for you?
I've had days where I've done so many interviews. I'm going to suspect I'll probably block a few days off around there.
Your family must love you.
The timing works out okay.
That's great. What's next for you, my friend?
Well, what's next is that, as I said, we've got more and more predictions coming to pass. I was doing a radio show, a night show, a few months back, and it was a call-in show. And this caller called in, and he says to the host, you sound like a reasonable guy, and Dr. Thiel sounds fine. He says, but are you people for real? And the host says, well, what do you mean? He says, well, science has disproven religion, and you're talking about all these predictions and prophecies. Why would you talk about such things? So the host turned it over to me. And I said, well, that's fine, I'll handle this. I guess the question you're asking me is, why do I believe in prophecies? Now, I didn't want to get overly theological, because I believe in Christ, I believe in the Bible and that kind of thing. But I said, for decades, I believe, based on my understanding of Bible prophecy, that the United States would become a creditor nation a debtor nation instead of a creditor nation. I said, I believed that a European empire would form. I believe that they'd have their own currency. I believe that East and West Germany would unite. I believed that the Soviet bloc nations would leave the Soviet Union, and many of them would become part of the European Union. And I said, when people like me believed it, decades ago, TV Guide said we bordered on lunacy. Okay? They call us lunatics.
That's right.
Because this stuff can't happen. The United States is powerful. The Soviet Union would never lose its, satellites and blah, 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 blah. I said, all that happened. And then I said, since the book came out, and by the way, it's gone up not from 8, it's now 10 world events that have happened since the book came out. So I went through the first 4 or 5 of them that I went through with you, on this show tonight. And then I probably mentioned a few more of the other ones. And the caller, who had been a polite skeptic, he wasn't an impolite skeptic. I mean, he wasn't, totally condescending. seemed like a legitimate question. Although, when he said that science had disproven religion, I had a problem with that one, but that's a whole other subject.
Yeah, I don't believe that.
No, actually, I think science proves religion as long as scientists are being real scientists.
Me too.
And I have a doctorate
Me too.
in one of the sciences, so I think that
You
science
have
does prove religion.
credibility. Yep.
But anyway, when I went through these predictions and prophecies that happened, he was basically speechless. Because it's like, oh, okay, some of these things really are going to happen. And they are going to happen.
And they are happening.
And, people in the U.S. and Canada can say, oh, things have never changed and things are always going to be like this. But since 1973, the United States, and we'll pick on the United States as opposed to Canada. You guys have had your own debt issues off and on. I know this because I buy stuff from Canada. I go to Canada. So, I've had a lot of dealings with Canada, by the way, through my entire life. But anyway,
Go ahead.
But talking about the U.S. specifically as opposed to Canada, the United States was the world's largest creditor nation.
That you were, absolutely.
Everybody owed the United States money.
Mm-hmm.
But in the last 45, 47 years, it switched. Now, the United States owes more money than any country ever has in the history of humanity. And you say, well, okay, that's interesting. What's this got to do with end-time prophecy? Well, there's a prophecy. This is in the Bible. It's in the Hebrew Scriptures, in the book of Habakkuk, for example. And it was funny because when I was in Guatemala, seeing some of the Mayan ruins,
mm-hmm.
one of the trips where I was talking to some Mayans, I was trying to read the Bible in both English and Spanish. Now, I don't really read Spanish, but I had a Bible that had both languages.
Oh, I see. Okay, cool.
And that helped me. Because what really helped me do was not to learn any Spanish, because I still can't speak it, but it made me slow down. Because I read sometimes quickly. So I read this prophecy in the book of Habakkuk. And I talked to this Catholic over there, and he's in a state of shock when I read him the prophecy. And I won't read it, but I'll paraphrase it, because I don't have a Bible in front of me. But what it says was, there's this vision. He says, it's for the appointed time. Even though it tarries or takes a long time to happen, it says in the end it will come. Okay, so it's an end-time prophecy, and it says, woe to him who loads up pledges to himself, that's debt. Will not your creditors rise up against you suddenly, and you become plundered by them?
So this
guy, he was a young Catholic, but he wasn't really a practicing Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
He was like, and when was this written? I said, 2,600 years ago. Really? I said, yeah, really.
Talk about an education and a red flag and unnerving all at the same time.
Right.
He must have flipped.
And I said that I believe that this had to do with the United States. Now, this is 4 or 5 years ago. Okay? I think the last time in Guatemala was probably about that long ago. I've been there a couple of times. And we went to Mayan ruins there. But anyway, the United States, by the way, has almost doubled its sovereign debt since I realized that prophecy was probably talking about the United States, because it's talking about somebody in debt at the end, the time of the end, and no one has been in more debt in the history of humanity than the United States currently is. They approved the debt ceiling in the United States to $14.3 trillion, I think around the 14th of February of this year. And again, that's almost double what it was when I originally read that prophecy. And if interest rates go up, and ultimately I think interest rates are going to go up, the U.S. won't be able to even pay the interest on the debt. And eventually, the Chinese, the Japanese, the Islamic countries in the Middle East, and others who are lending so much money to the United States, they're not going to like this. And the Europeans, by the way, well, that's not in the $14.3 trillion of debt that we have. They have, I think it's $5 to $7 trillion invested in American businesses. So there's a lot of foreign money into the United States. And again, and I haven't looked into Canada's sovereign debt situation. I know quite a few years ago you guys were on the brink.
Yeah, we're okay now.
And the rumor was the U.S. was supposedly going to bail you out, but we never did, which is good. You guys, your exports improved, and you guys had a great improvement in your economy. You still have debt issues there.
Well,
not as bad as quite a few years ago.
You're listening to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. The time is now. And now your host, Brent Holland.
What saved our butt was the oil from Alberta. And I don't know if you know this, but Canada supplies the most oil. We're your biggest supplier for oil, not Saudi Arabia.
I know that. The United States. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I know that. I don't think most Americans know that.
No, they all think it's Middle Eastern oil.
I'm very well aware of that. But as I said, I buy product. I go to Canada. I've got Canadian contacts, and I
sure. So you know.
Back and forth.
Yeah.
I watch the price of the Canadian dollar versus the U.S. dollar.
Me too.
Close to parity right now again.
Yeah. It won't last long. Actually, a high dollar does us no good because you're our biggest trading partner, and
I know
we're yours as well. And we make more money when our dollar is hovering around 85, 83 cents is probably the prime for us because that still gives us buying power. But
well, I made the most when your dollar was worth about 73 cents.
Me too.
Then it went up to 90-something, which it is now.
Yeah.
But anyway, these prophecies are starting to come to pass. Who would have thought that the United States could be in so much debt?
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
Who would have thought that? Understand this. Every American owes the Chinese thousands of dollars each. We owe each, we owe the Chinese. Okay, the Chinese were very poor people when I was born.
Me too.
They were kind of poor. They're fairly poor people 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. They're not that wealthy yet, but we owe them money. I mean, and a ton of it. And it's prophecy. Will not your creditors rise up against you suddenly? There are Chinese and Russian prophecies, by the way, especially a Russian prophecy, that the United States is going to be split up into a zillion pieces, and Russia and China and Europe are going to get parts of it.
Really? I don't know this prophecy.
By the way, that talks about this leader called the King of the North, who's this great monarch guy I was telling you about, who said he's going to go against the strongest fortresses, which I think is the United States, because the United States is the strongest military in the world. Absolutely. He's going to win, and he's going to divide their land for gain. And that's consistent with definitely Russian prophecies and other prophecies out there. And so when people discount all these prophecies, because a lot of people go out and they get predictions that are wrong. I don't doubt that in the least. Mm-hmm. Some of these apparitions of Mary, the prophecies are wrong. A lot of these Catholic prophecies, some are right, some are wrong. And the Catholic position is that some are right and some are wrong. But I believe strongly, though, that the biblical ones will come to pass. And those non-biblical prophecies that line up to biblical prophecies, I think people who believe or don't believe the Bible should pay some attention to them. And that's what I tried to do in the book. I tried to lay them out so a discerning person can look at this and say, you know what, those are the prophecies. I may or not agree with what Dr. Thiel says about them, but those certainly are the prophecies. And it is interesting how they line up, so people can make up their own mind and think what they should want to do about all this.
It's a terrific book, folks. I urge you all to get it. 2012 and the Rise of the Secret Sect. Our guest tonight, Dr. Bob Thiel. Bob, I guess we'll have to start to wrap up now. Is there any final words you'd like to say? And I don't mean final and final. I would like you to come back, actually. One of the questions I have for you left is I would like you to come back and give us an update from time to time, if that's okay with you.
I'd love to.
That would be wonderful. Any words of caution? Any words of, well, I guess that's what you've been saying all night. I guess I'm looking for hope here that we don't have to go through the crap to get to the peace, but perhaps...
Well, from a biblical perspective, I believe we'll have to go through the rough time before good times come. I saw somebody once hold up a Bible once and he said the following. He says, I read to the end. He said, in the end, we win. And that part I believe. The problem is getting to the end, both biblical Hopi prophecies and other non-biblical prophecies warn about, and even Mayan prophecies, by the way, warn about a time of tribulation coming. I think we are setting ourselves up for it. I think some of these things are not just natural events, like the U.S. getting itself into debt. The U.S. did this, and that's consistent with prophecies. So what I would tell people especially those who are going to get the book, look at the predictions, look at the sources, look at the references, check it out to see if it's true. Okay, don't just take my word for it, because you're going to hear people say all kinds of stuff that aren't that true. I'm sure they'll be better speakers than I am. But if you look at the prophecies, look at the predictions, see how they line up with world events, I think discerning people will therefore decide to take steps to protect themselves, protect their families, and that's part of the reason the prophecies are there. And I've had Christian types who objected to me talking about prophecies, but even the book of Revelation said that Jesus Christ is the spirit of prophecy. I mean, the prophecy is in the Bible, and it's at least a quarter, if not a third, of the Bible talks about prophecy.
Oh, at least. Just about, in my view, basically the whole book is just about a book of prophecy, telling us basically how to behave and what to look for.
I agree.
Yeah. I can't think of a better way to end this whole series on 2012, folks, than with Bob Thiel. Just a riveting evening. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and taking the time out. Our guest tonight, Dr. Bob Thiel, 2012 and the Rise of the Secret Sect. Thank you so much, my friend, and we'll figure something out. We'll get you back on in, 2, 3, maybe 6 months or something else. God forbid if they make that peace deal. You'll be back on that night.
I don't expect that before the fall at the earliest.
Oh, man. Whew. I never thought I would dread a peace deal in the Middle East, but now, man, you've got me. Oof. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been a great evening. Terrific. All the best to you and yours, my friend.
Thank you, too.
Take care now. Bye-bye. Ladies and gentlemen, Bob Thiel.
You're listening to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. The time is now. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Wasn't that a great show? What a guest. What a knowledgeable guest. Actually, all the guests during this 2012 have just been phenomenal. Just let me reiterate, starting off the beginning of the month, we had Andrea Bruce was here, as you know, 2012, Science or Superstition. Is the Earth losing its mojo? How did 2012 come to mean the end of times? What the hell is Planet X? Great show. And you know where you can download it, www.nightfrightshow.com, www.nightfrightshow.com. Just click on the archives. All those shows are there for you to download free. Take advantage of that. That's a heck of a gift. The week after that, something I was unaware of. Crystal skulls. There's that darn throat thing again. I apologize profoundly for that. Crystal skulls in 2012. We had a great time with Joshua Shapiro. He was such a knowledgeable man. Remember, he took us through that whole story, how he went down to South America and up the mountain. Incredible. Should be made into a movie. Again, shows there, www.nightfrightshow.com. And then, of course, we had 2012 and Armageddon, and that was Patrick Garrow. He was here, How to Survive 2012. Now, he believes in a total end of world 2012, where the world will virtually come to an end. There are only going to be a couple of spots in the whole world where you'll be able to survive. I am not in that camp. I just want to tell folks right now, when you listen to that show, I am not in that camp. But decide for yourself. As I say, always question everything. He believes it so much so that he and a few of his friends have quit their jobs, have bought some land in Spain, top of a mountain where he thinks it's going to be the only survivable place. That and a couple of other places. Listen to the show. Buy the book, How to Survive 2012. Buy all these books and educate yourself to what's coming up. And of course, a great way to end it, this whole series tonight with Dr. Bob Thiel and his book, 2012 and the Rise of the Secret Sect. I want to thank all the guests for making time to come on this show. As I mentioned before, folks, this is a volunteer radio show for me. I pay for the website out of my own pocket. What's more, these guests come on and don't make a dime off this show. Maybe they'll sell some books, but by and large, they come on this show because they care. They want to get this information out to the people. You know, that's honorable and that's admirable for those folks to take 2 hours out of their lives to come on and share this information with us. So that's really, really something else. Just to let you know, as I said, next week will be a taped show, but it is a new show. It will not be from the archives. The content of that show is going to be stunning. The first hour, are you ready for this? It's going to be a fella by the name of Frenchy Brulette. Now, I should tell you, the fellow who wrote the book, his name is Matthew Randazzo V, and he was born and raised in New Orleans as well. This is about the JFK assassination and New Orleans, and for all the JFK assassination aficionados out there that are listening right now, you and I know more than Dallas, more than anywhere else, even Chicago or Tampa, New Orleans was probably where this assassination originated. Now, Matthew Randazzo V has interviewed this fellow by the name of Frenchy Brulette. He was a mafioso wise guy from the early 40s, and he's still alive today. He has all the rumors, all the hearsay, and a little bit more than that too, folks. He names names of who the actual shooters were. Oh yeah, baby. You don't want to miss that show. That's next week for the first hour. The second hour, fellow by the name of Vin Smith. Now, Vin Smith is a very good friend of mine. He has a radio show like this right on the internet. He does past life regressions. And guess what? In the middle of our conversation, he proposed to do a past life regression with me right on the radio, right on the telephone. We did it. And guess what? Next week, we find out who Brent Holland was in a previous life. And I can't say it was a revelation for me or earth-shattering. I kind of had a suspicion, but this just solidified it. That'll be the second part of the show next week. For those of you that are in Sudbury and are listening in Sudbury, next week we're doing a live show at SRO. The show will start at 8 o'clock at night, finish at 10:30. That's why I won't be here in the studio live next week. We're doing a show. Our guest next week is going to be Peter Mahaichuk will be here. Will be at the live show next week, and we're going to be looking at his work. He's worked with a fella by the name of Wes Craven, who you've heard of before. Peter does art decoration for films, feature films, and we're going to be interviewing him and his artwork. He's done album covers, book covers, all kinds of spooky stuff. Fascinating fella. That's going to be live next week at SRO, and that show, which I'm recording next week, will be on the week after, the 14th. So stick around for that. It's going to be a lot of fun. And those of you, again, that are listening in Sudbury right now, come on down. I've got some books to give away. Some great books that were sent to me today, and you're going to really like them. Free giveaways. So I've got 4 of them, so the first 4 people will come up to me and say, give me a book. You got them, Pontiac. Then we're diving into 2 weeks of a very special. A very special. I think I'm making up my own language at this point. Vampires. Oh, yeah, baby. In April, vampires. Great author from Montreal, Nancy Kilpatrick. Vampires Evolve. And J.M. Dixon the week after, The Wiser Field Guide to Vampire Legends, Practices, and Encounters. Old and new. Let me warn you for these 2 shows, folks. Get the crosses out. Get the garlic. Get the holy water. Get ready to have the bejesus scared out of you. Great books, the 2 of them. A lot of fun. A lot of great stuff coming up. Thank you so much, as always, for sending me those emails. nightfrightshow@gmail.com. nightfrightshow@gmail.com. I'm Brent Holland. Thank you all so much for listening. See you next week.
You're listening to Night Fright and your host, Brent Holland. The time is now. Your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio.